For 6 months, Aaliyah Cooper brought breakfast to an old man every single morning. A peanut butter sandwich, a banana, coffee, and a thermos. 6:15 a.m., without fail, at the same bus stop where he slept. She was 22, black, working 2 jobs just to keep a roof over her head. He was 68, white, homeless, telling stories nobody believed. Then one morning, everything changed. 3 military officers knocked on her apartment door at dawn. Dress uniforms, a colonel standing at attention on her cracked doorstep. When Aaliyah opened the door, still in her hospital uniform, exhausted from a double shift, her heart dropped. "Miss Cooper," Music the colonel said, "we're here about George Fletcher." "George, the old man from the bus stop?" Her voice shook. "Did something happen to him?" The colonel's face was grave. "Ma'am, we need to talk about what you did for him." 6 months earlier, Aaliyah had noticed him for the first time. She took the number 47 bus every morning at 6:30. The stop was 3 blocks from her apartment, right outside a closed-down laundromat. That's where George slept, on a flattened cardboard box, a wool blanket pulled up to his chin, Music, his few belongings, stuffed into a trash bag beside him. Most people walked past without looking. Some crossed the street to avoid him. Music Aaliyah had done the same thing for 2 weeks, telling herself she didn't have enough to help. She barely had enough for herself. But one morning in late March, she'd packed Music an extra sandwich for lunch and realized she wouldn't have time to eat it. Her shift at the hospital cafeteria ran until 3 o'clock. Then she had to be at the grocery store by 4 to stock shelves until midnight. The sandwich would just go bad in her locker. George was awake when she approached. His eyes were sharp, clearer than she expected. He watched her carefully, like he was used to people either ignoring him or yelling at him to move along. "Excuse me," Aaliyah said, holding out the wrapped sandwich. "I made too much. You want this?" He stared at the sandwich, then at her face. For a long moment, he didn't move. "You need that more than I do," he said quietly. "That's debatable," Aaliyah replied. "But I'm offering." He took it with both hands like it was something precious. "Thank you, Miss Aaliyah." "George." He nodded once. "George Fletcher." She almost walked away then, almost went back to her routine of not seeing him, not getting involved. But something about the way he'd said thank you with dignity, not desperation, made her pause. "Do you take your coffee black or with sugar?" she asked, his eyebrows lifted. "Black's fine." The next morning, she brought coffee in a thermos and a banana. Music. The morning after that, another sandwich and an apple. By the end of the first week, it had become a routine she couldn't imagine breaking. 6:15 a.m. Every single day, George was always awake, always waiting at the same spot. They'd talk for 5, maybe 10 minutes before her bus came. He'd ask about her classes. She was taking nursing courses at the community college 2 nights a week when she could afford it. She'd ask about his day, and he'd tell her stories. Strange stories. "Back in my helicopter days," he'd say, staring past her at nothing. "We flew senators out to places that don't exist on maps." Or, "I worked for a 3-letter agency once. Can't tell you Music which one, but I can tell you those folks don't forget faces." Aaliyah figured he was confused. Maybe mentally music ill, maybe just old and lonely, building himself a past that felt more important than sleeping on cardboard. She didn't correct him. She just listened. Other people weren't so kind. One morning in April, a businessman in an expensive suit walked past and deliberately kicked George's blanket into the gutter. Aaliyah was 10 feet away, about to cross the street. "Hey," she spun around, her voice sharp. "What's wrong with you?" The businessman didn't even slow down. "He's blocking the sidewalk. That's somebody's grandfather." Aaliyah shot back. The man kept walking. George sat quietly, pulling his blanket back from the dirty water pooling at the curb. His hands shook. From cold or anger, Aaliyah couldn't tell. She helped him wring out the blanket. It smelled like mildew and exhaust fumes. "You didn't have to do that," George said softly. "Yeah, I did." He looked at her for a long time. Then he smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "You've got a fight in you." "That's good." He folded the damp blanket across his lap. "You're going to need it." Aaliyah didn't understand what he meant. Not then. She just handed him his coffee, same as Music always, and waited for the bus. By May, the routine was as automatic as breathing. Wake up at 5, make 2 sandwiches, Music, 1 for George, 1 for herself, pack a banana, pour coffee into the thermos, walk 3 blocks, sit with George for 10 minutes, catch the 6:30 bus. It wasn't charity. It didn't feel like charity. It felt like the only thing in her life that made sense. Aaliyah's apartment was a studio on the 4th floor of a building that should have been condemned years ago. 300 square feet, a hot plate instead of a stove, a bathroom where the shower only worked if you kicked the pipes Music first. Rent was $650 a month, and she was always 2 weeks behind. The eviction notice had been taped to her door in March. She'd talked the landlord into a payment plan, Music, an extra $40 a week until she caught up. She'd been paying it off ever since, which meant every other bill got pushed to the edge. Her kitchen counter told the story. Electric bill past due. Medical debt from an emergency room visit 2 years ago in collections. Student loan payment deferred again. Cell phone 1 month from disconnection. And in the middle of all that paper, a loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter. Aaliyah stood at the counter on a Tuesday night in late May, doing the math in her head. She'd gotten paid that morning, $280 from the hospital, another $160 from the grocery store. Subtract rent, subtract the payment plan, subtract bus fare for 2 weeks, $90 left for everything else. She opened the fridge. A carton of eggs with 3 left, half a jug of milk, some wilted lettuce she had thrown out days ago. That was it. Her stomach had been empty since lunch, but she'd learned to ignore that feeling. She'd eat music tomorrow or the day after. It didn't matter. What mattered was the bread and peanut butter. Enough for another week of sandwiches for George. Music, maybe 2 weeks if she stretched it. Aaliyah closed the fridge and leaned against it, pressing her forehead to the cold metal door. She could stop. She could keep the sandwiches for herself, save the coffee money, catch up on the electric bill before they shut it off. George would understand. Music, he'd probably tell her to stop anyway if he knew how tight things were. But the thought of walking past that bus stop, seeing him there, not stopping, she couldn't do it. At the hospital cafeteria the next day, Mrs. Carter noticed. Mrs. Carter was the kitchen supervisor, 60-some Chinese-American, with the kind of sharp eyes that saw everything. She'd worked at the hospital for 30 years and had seen every version of struggling that existed. "Are you eating today?" Mrs. Carter asked, watching Aaliyah wipe down tables during the lunch rush. "I ate breakfast," Music Aaliyah lied. "Uh-huh." Mrs. Carter crossed her arms. "Are you feeding that homeless man again?" Aaliyah's shoulders stiffened. "His name is George." "I know his name, honey. I'm asking if you're feeding him instead of yourself." "I'm fine." Mrs. Carter sighed. She disappeared into the kitchen and came back 5 minutes later with a container of leftover pasta and a bread roll. She pressed it into Aaliyah's hands. "You eat this now. I don't want to see you passing out on my shift." Her voice softened. "He's a person." "I get it. But you know what else?" "What?" "You're a person, too." Aaliyah stared at the container. Her throat felt tight. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just eat." That night, lying on her mattress on the floor, she'd sold the bed frame 2 months ago to make rent. Aaliyah stared at the ceiling and did the math again. If she skipped her Thursday class, she could pick up an extra shift at the grocery store, another $40. If she walked to work instead of taking the bus 3 days a week, she'd save $12. If she asked the landlord for 1 more week, her phone buzzed. Music, a text from the electric company. Final notice. Service will be disconnected in 7 days without payment of $127. Aaliyah closed her eyes. 1 more week of bringing George breakfast. Music, that's all she'd commit to. 1 more week and then she'd have to stop. She'd explain it to him. He'd understand. She had to take care of herself first. The music, that's what anyone would say. That's what made sense. But when Friday morning came, Aaliyah still made 2 sandwiches, Music still poured coffee into the thermos, still walked 3 blocks to the bus stop. George was waiting, same as always. And when he split his sandwich in half and handed part of it back to her, "Fair is fair," he said simply. Aaliyah had to turn away so he wouldn't see her, Music crying. George wasn't at the bus stop on Monday morning. Aaliyah stood there with the sandwich and thermos, scanning the empty sidewalk. His cardboard was gone. His trash bag of belongings gone. Even the damp spot where he usually slept had dried up, leaving no trace he'd ever been there. She waited until her bus came and went. Waited through the next one. By the time she finally climbed aboard the 3rd bus, she was going to be late for her shift, and her chest felt hollow. She told herself he'd just moved to a different spot. People did that. Maybe someone had hassled him. Maybe the police had cleared the block. It didn't mean anything bad had happened, but she checked the spot again that evening after work. Still nothing. Tuesday morning, empty. Wednesday, empty. By Thursday, Aaliyah couldn't ignore the knot in her stomach anymore. She stopped by the Mercy Street shelter on her way home from the grocery store, even though it was 10 blocks out of her way and her feet were killing her. The woman at the intake desk barely looked up. "Name? I'm looking for someone." "George Fletcher, older white man, late 60s, usually sleeps near the bus stop on Clayton. We don't track people who don't check in here." "Can you just look?" Aaliyah pressed. "Please." The woman sighed and typed something into her computer. Waited. Music shook her head. "No one by that name in our system." "What about the hospitals? Is there a Music way to check you family?" Aaliyah hesitated. "I'm a friend then. No privacy laws." The woman's tone softened just slightly. "Look, honey, people move around. He probably found another spot. They always Music do." Aaliyah called 3 hospitals that night. None of them would tell her anything without a family connection or a patient ID number she didn't have. On the 7th day, she went back to the bus stop with a paper bag and a note inside. "Hope you're okay," as she left it where George usually slept and tried not to think about what it meant that she Music was leaving food for a ghost. That afternoon he was there. Aaliyah almost missed her stop on the bus home because she wasn't expecting to see him. But there he was, sitting on the same flattened cardboard, his trash bag beside him. Thinner than before. His face is more drawn. She got off at the next stop and ran back. George. He looked up, and for a second she thought he didn't recognize her. Then his face softened. Miss Aliyah. She crouched down beside him, breathing hard. Where were you? I checked shelters. I called hospitals. Had a spell. His voice was raspier than usual. I'm all right now. You don't look all right. I'm upright. That counts for something. He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's when she noticed his hand. A fresh scar across the back of it, still pink and healing. Music. It looked surgical, too clean to be from a fall or a fight. What happened to your hand? George pulled his sleeve down quickly. Nothing. Old wound acting up. George, I'm fine. His tone left no room for argument. They sat in silence for a moment. Then George reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. White, slightly crumpled, with an address written in shaky handwriting on the front. He held it out to her. If something happens to me, he said quietly, I need you to mail this. Aliyah stared at the envelope. What do you mean? If something happens, just promise me. You're not going anywhere. Aliyah? His voice was firm. Serious. Promise me. She took the envelope. It was heavier than she expected. I promise. George nodded slowly like a weight had lifted. Good girl. She wanted to ask what was inside. Wanted to ask why he'd been gone, where he'd been, music, what that scar really meant. But her bus was coming, and George had already closed his eyes, leaning back music against the brick wall like the conversation had exhausted him. Aliyah slipped the envelope into her bag and caught the bus. She didn't open it. Not music yet. 2 weeks later, George collapsed. Aliyah was handing him the thermos of coffee when his hand started shaking. Not the usual tremor from cold or age. This was different. Music violent. The thermos slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the sidewalk, coffee spilling across the concrete. George. He tried to say something, but his words came out slurred. His eyes rolled back and then his whole body folded, knees buckling, shoulders crumpling forward. Aliyah caught him before his head hit the pavement. Somebody call 911, she screamed. A woman across the street pulled out her phone. A man in jogging gear stopped, hesitated, then kept running. 2 people getting off the bus just stared. Aliyah lowered George onto his side, her hands shaking. His breathing was shallow, erratic. His lips were turning pale. Stay with me, she whispered. Come on, George. Stay music with me. The ambulance arrived 7 minutes later. Felt like 7 hours. Aliyah climbed into the back without asking permission. One of the paramedics tried to stop her. Are you family? But she was already inside, gripping George's hand as they loaded him onto the gurney. I'm all he's got, she said. The paramedic didn't argue. At the hospital, everything moved too fast and too slow at the same time. They wheeled George through double doors into the emergency room. A nurse took Aliyah's arm and guided her to a waiting area. Green chairs bolted to the floor, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, a TV on mute showing the morning news. She sat music down, realized she was still holding the empty thermos. Her shift at the cafeteria had started 20 minutes ago. She pulled out her phone and texted Mrs. Carter. Emergency. Music can't make it today? I'm sorry. Mrs. Carter replied immediately. You okay? George collapsed. I'm at the hospital. Which one? St. Music Vincent's. I'll cover your shift. Keep me posted. Aliyah closed her eyes and tried not to cry. An hour passed, then another. Finally, a nurse called her name. Aliyah Cooper. She jumped up. That's me. The nurse led her to a desk where a woman in scrubs sat behind a computer looking exhausted and annoyed in equal measure. Her name tag read R. Williams. Patient intake? You're here for George Fletcher? The woman asked without looking up. Yes. Is he okay? He's stable. Severe dehydration, possible stroke. We're running tests. She clicked through something on her screen. But we have a problem. He has no insurance card, no ID, no emergency contact. We need to transfer him to the county overflow? Aliyah's stomach dropped. What does that mean? It means he'll get care, but not here. County General has space. County General is a nightmare. I've heard the stories. People wait for days. It's policy, the woman said flatly, without proof of insurance or ability to pay. He's a veteran. Aliyah's voice came out sharper than she intended. Check the VA system. The woman finally looked up. Do you have proof of that? No, but then I can't check. We need documentation, a VA card, discharge papers, something. Aliyah's mind raced. She thought about the envelope George had given her, still sitting in her bag at home. Thought about the stories he'd told. The helicopters, the 3-letter agencies, the senators. She'd always assumed he was confused. But what if he wasn't? I'm his niece, Aliyah said. The woman's eyebrows rose. His niece? Yes. And you don't have any of his paperwork? He's been living on the street. He doesn't keep paperwork in his pocket. Aliyah leaned forward. But I know he served. I know he has benefits. Just run music the check, please. The woman stared at her for a long moment, clearly skeptical. Then someone behind them. A doctor in a white coat, music South Asian, maybe mid-40s, spoke up. Run it, Rachel. The intake woman turned. Dr. Patel, just run it as a courtesy. Dr. Patel looked at Aliyah. If there's a match, we keep him. If not county, fair. Aaliyah nodded quickly. Fair. Rachel sighed and started typing. The wait felt endless. 30 seconds that stretched into infinity. Then the computer beeped. Rachel's expression changed. She leaned closer to the screen, reading something. Her jaw tightened. What? Dr. Patel asked. There's a match. George Allen Fletcher, born 1957. Honorable discharge 2001. She scrolled down. Service record is heavily redacted. Almost everything's blacked out. Dr. Patel moved behind the desk to look. What does that mean? It means his service was classified, Rachel said quietly. She looked at Aaliyah differently now, less annoyed, more confused. What exactly did your uncle do in the military? Aaliyah's throat felt dry. I don't know. He didn't talk about it much. That was true in a way. He talked about it constantly. She just hadn't believed him. Dr. Patel music straightened up. Transfer him to Ward C. I'll handle the VA billing authorization myself. Are you sure? Rachel Music asked. If the VA disputes, they won't. Not with a record like this. He looked at Aaliyah. You can see him in about an hour. He's going to need someone checking in on him. I will, Aaliyah said. Every day. She sat in the waiting room until they let her into his room. George was awake barely. An IV drip fed into his arm. Monitors beeped softly beside the bed. He looked smaller than before, swallowed up by white sheets and hospital machinery. Hey, She Music said softly, pulling a chair close. His eyes opened, focused on her face. He tried to smile. You didn't have to, he whispered. Yeah, I did. He reached for her hand, the one without the IV. His grip was weak but steady. You've got that fight, he murmured. Good. She stayed until visiting hours ended. Stayed through the shift she was supposed to work at the grocery store. Stayed until a nurse gently told her she had to leave, that George needed rest, that she could come back in the morning. Walking out through the hospital lobby, Aaliyah passed the cafeteria where she worked. Mrs. Carter was still there, wiping down tables at the end of her shift. Their eyes met through the glass doors. Mrs. Carter just nodded. Aaliyah nodded back. On the bus ride home, she stared out the window and thought about the look on Rachel's face when she'd seen George's file. Thought about all those redacted lines, all that classified history. She thought about the envelope. And for the first time, she wondered if George's stories hadn't been stories at all. George was transferred to a VA long-term care facility 3 weeks later. It was across town, 2 buses, and a 15-minute walk from Aaliyah's apartment. She couldn't visit as often as she wanted, but she went when she could, twice a week, sometimes 3 times if her schedule allowed. The facility was nicer than she expected. Clean rooms and music staff who actually seemed to care. George had his own bed, his own window. He was eating regular meals, taking medication, sleeping under real blankets. He looked better, stronger. His mind seemed clearer, too. On one visit in early July, he was sitting up in bed when she arrived, a notebook open on his lap. He was writing something, slow, careful handwriting that filled page after page. What's that? Aaliyah asked, setting down the small bag she'd brought. Cookies from the hospital cafeteria. Mrs. Carter had sent them. George looked up. My memory's going, he said simply. Ro wrote down things that matter, things that are true. He closed the notebook and held it out to her. I want you to have this, George. Just take it, please. She took the notebook. It was small, pocket-sized music with a worn leather cover. She flipped through the pages. Names, dates, places, music, strings of numbers she didn't understand. Some entries were clear. Others were hurried, almost frantic. What is all this? If anyone ever asks, George said, you'll know what's true. Aaliyah didn't understand. But she slipped the notebook into her bag next to the envelope he'd given her weeks ago. 2 pieces of a puzzle she couldn't see yet. Her life was getting slightly better. The hospital had given her a small raise, 20 cents an hour, but it was something. She'd finally caught up on rent. The electric company had agreed to a payment plan. She could breathe a little easier. And she'd used part of her first full paycheck to buy George something. She pulled it out of the bag, a thick, warm blanket, navy blue soft music fleece. George stared at it, then at her, his eyes filled with tears. No one's done this much for me in 20 years, he whispered. Aaliyah draped the blanket over his legs. Well, somebody should have. He reached for her hand and held it for a long time, not saying anything. Some things didn't need words. George died on a Tuesday in late August. The facility is called Aaliyah at 6 o'clock in the morning. She was getting ready for her shift, music standing in her tiny kitchen making coffee when her phone rang. Miss Cooper, this is Pine Valley Via Care. I'm calling about George Fletcher. Her hand froze on the coffee pot. He passed peacefully in his sleep last night. Heart failure. I'm very sorry for your loss. The words didn't make sense at first. Aaliyah heard them, but music they floated somewhere outside her body, not connecting to anything real. Miss Cooper, are you there? Yes. Her voice sounded strange, distant. I'm here. We'll need you to come in to handle his personal effects. There's music, not much. The blanket you brought him, the notebook, a few clothes, and we'll need to discuss arrangements. Arrangements for his remains. If there's no family, I'll be there in an hour. She hung up, stood in her kitchen, staring at nothing. The coffee pot was still in her hand. George was gone. The man she'd brought breakfast to every morning for 6 months. The man who'd told impossible stories and split his sandwich with her when she was hungry. The man who'd looked at her like she mattered, like what she did mattered. Gone. Aaliyah set the coffee pot down carefully and sat on the floor. She didn't cry. She couldn't. The grief was too big, too heavy. It sat in her chest like a stone. She called in sick to work. Took the bus across town to the facility.